this sort of brings us on to sort of Unison staff and Unison members. We know that particularly some white Unison staff and members have communicated to Unison more broadly, feeling quite uncomfortable talking about race, finding it a difficult thing to talk about, particularly when it's so often framed as this debate. It's the idea of it being two sides, or like you say, that sort of culture war phrasing, that kind of thing. So I'm going to go to Carola first here, just to give a bit of perspective on kind of what members and staff are kind of feeding back to you, but also from your perspective, obviously, as a white member of staff.
The research that I had heard about wasn't actually about Unison staff. It was research among managers in general, which showed that in general, managers, white managers, are often uncomfortable talking about race. But I think there's a big move across from that to what we know in our own experience. I'm sure we've all been in situations where people tie themselves in knots, trying to avoid talking about race specifically, even though it's quite clear that's what's on their mind. And I think it's like anything that in order to become comfortable with anything, you have to practice it. I think, again, as with so many other different types of equality, it's so important that those of us who spend so much of our time thinking about equality sort of model the practice. So we talk confidently about race equality. I as a white woman, think it's very important that one, I've kept myself educated about what language to use, and there's so much advice out there, including advice from Unison. And at the end of this conversation, we are going to flag where people can find all Unison's equality resources. But we need to be the ones leading that conversation, and just showing that it's not a taboo subject, it's a vital subject, and we can't tackle race discrimination without talking about race discrimination and race equality.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of kind of my perspective as someone who works with lots of different organisations on this, that discomfort from white people is everywhere. We all feel it, it's in the room with us. But if we aren't able to handle that discomfort, then we aren't able to grow. So it's really important for us as white people to take responsibility for the fact that, okay, maybe we don't feel equipped to have these conversations. Maybe this isn't something we're trained in. Maybe it's not something we learned about in school, or, whatever, but we need to learn to do that. And we need to be leading those conversations and making it happen. And that actually our discomfort, A, isn't that massive in the grand scheme of things, but B, it's a good sign. It's a sign that we're challenging ourselves and that we're growing and changing. So learning to try and maybe get a bit more comfortable with our discomfort, if that's not too much of a contradiction in terms, and see it as showing that we're on the right track, that we are feeling uncomfortable. So Alex, I know you've got an example here of something kind of on the ground that you've done in your region as an example of the kind of things that are happening kind of across Unison.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think you're absolutely right there, Addie. It's a situation where we need to get out of our comfort zones, because that's where we learn most, isn't it? It's that's where we absorb and we adapt and we learn. And I think in our region, in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, which we saw kind of coming to the fore in early lockdown, as a white male, as a white member of our staff, I was appalled by what was happening. I was in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then at work, the kind of light was put on us. He said, well, what are you going to do about it? And suddenly I was out of my comfort zone. And in that position where, as a white man, I was being asked to look at Black members' issues and do something about it. And it was a learning curve. I needed a lot of reassurance, and I decided the best way to do it was to basically ask and get a steer from our Black members. I think the worst thing I could have done, and through reading and researching, which is essential when you don't know something about a topic, would be to speak for, or to say that I knew what the issues were. What I see my role very much as being is facilitating and helping and making things happen, so other people's voices can be heard or amplified or put in the correct forum or situation where they can be heard. And that's what we've done in our region. So we were tasked with delivering a project that was a response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I've been working in the local government branches on I guess something like a self-organized group, but it's bringing together particularly or specifically Black members from local government across the entire Cambridgeshire and Peterborough area, and it's working really well. We're developing activists within there, and we are working on a work plan, but I've always taken my lead from them. I have guided them sometimes, because I think sometimes people need a bit of guidance if they're not used to organizing, and that's our job. Mm-hmm. But I've always taken the lead from them, and that's how I have learned and how I have become more comfortable facing this and dealing with this as a white man, by educating myself and listening to other people.
Thanks, Alex. Hopefully there's some ideas there for the people listening to this to think about and consider in sort of their roles and in their regions. I really like that idea of not speaking for, but thinking about what you can do to open doors, remove barriers, remove blockers, get things to happen. How can you kind of almost be, like you say, facilitating behind the scenes, making those things happen, so that the people with lived experience, you know, their expertise, basically, experts by experience, if you want to call it that, can drive it. I think that's a really nice way to talk about it. Devinder, I want to come to you in terms of talking about race. Obviously, this is something you do as part of your day job. So to sort of get your perspective on discomfort, particularly when it comes to talking about race.
I suppose because it is my day job, I'm not uncomfortable talking about it, but obviously talking to, as Alex has said, I've talked to colleagues, I've talked to managers where it is uncomfortable. And I think, Alex, you've said it, ask. There's nothing wrong with asking. I mean, we have this tendency not to want to offend people and kind of tiptoeing around things. So it's almost, we kind of avoid it, and it is the elephant in the room, because when people say, I don't see colour, well, that's offensive to a person who's Black. So I think it's about addressing it and just kind of asking the questions. And I suppose that's what we're trying to do with our anti-racism training currently, is to kind of increase the confidence of managers and also of staff to be able to have these conversations. Like you said, they are uncomfortable, but they need to happen. And I think it is a process of people educating themselves, but us as a union as well, helping our staff to be educated. So I think we've got a role, obviously, through staff learning and development to do that as well. So it's a two-pronged kind of approach. And I suppose being open to learning, all of us, as we said right at the beginning, we don't have all the answers. But let's ask the questions. Let's ask those ones that think, oh no, I don't want to sound silly if I ask this question. Ask it, because you're probably not the only person in the room that's thinking the same. I had to actually Google woke when it first came out. I didn't know what it meant. I thought, is it to do with that Wookiee in, is it Star Wars or something? So I was like, honestly didn't have a clue. So yeah, I think it is just educate ourselves and educate others as well. And I think Alex has alluded to that as well, you know, be the ally, learn how to do that.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on this question, Anna?
Yeah, I think what Alex described actually was brilliant. So that's a kind of allyship. That's a kind of giving a steer. And and helping people get their views across, and actually there's actions behind it. The one thing that I would just say, as it's part of my job as well, so I speak about race all the time, it's part of my job, but when it's on a personal level, it takes quite an emotional toll. So a colleague discussing it with me, ask the questions, but there might be some times that I might not want to have that conversation because I've just got a ton of rubbish emails coming into our mailbox. Something's really offensive has upset me, or, you know, so I think it's just for people to also be aware that I don't have all the answers because my skin is of a certain colours. I don't know how everybody, you know, I don't have the same experience as everybody else as well. So just because you're having a conversation with one person, or somebody might tell you a little bit about their experience, you can't then sort of go and project that onto everybody else. And just also just to be really sensitive that quite often, you know, if people don't do this in their working life, if these conversations and these issues aren't there every day for them, they, you know, it might be upsetting for them to discuss things. At work, I can't switch off. In my personal life, I can switch off. I can turn off the Facebook. I can turn off Twitter. No notifications. But at work, I can't do that. So when colleagues are having these discussions, I think it's just a bit of just a bit of awareness of the emotional toll that can happen.